Hello, readers by eyes and by ears. This is Mighty Channel. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you could not tell, your girl is super excited. Why? Because we are officially about to read the last two chapters of Volume 2's Thousand Autumns, or Qianqiu by Meng Xi Shi. And I'm super stoked that Shen Qiao finally gets a fair fight with Kunye. Also, the last chapter is called Group Ambush. If you know, you know, but I'm not going to spoil it anyway. I'm super excited. Okay, you guys, enjoy. Chapter 51, Limits. No one in Bisha sect expected the battle to be so intense. Kunye was a martial expert of his generation, after all, and he was also Hulugu's disciple. His master had nearly fought Tifengge to a standstill. Such an opponent wasn't so easily bested. Shen Qiao had already lost once, and it left a shadow in his mind. Winning the second round was even harder than winning the first. Not only must he overcome his opponent, he also had to overcome himself. Though the Bisha sect disciples were worried, they took heart from seeing their sect leader standing next to him. They felt like even if Shen Qiao lost, their sect leader could still fight. Only Yue Kunchi understood that Zhao Chiying's forceful exit from her meditation had damaged her cultivation. If Shen Qiao lost this match, all fate held for Bisha sect was to be carved up by the enemy. Could Shen Qiao win? He swallowed down his restlessness and refocused his mind entirely on the battle. The martial path Kunye followed was the brash and unconstrained kind, forceful and domineering. There was incredible vigor and authority behind his every slash, each powerful enough to shake the mountains and earth. Whenever his blade teeth struck the ground, the spectators felt it quake beneath their feet. As the saber whistled through the air, the sound shrilly droned in their ears. Those with poorer martial foundations were covering their ears already, unable to bear it. But if someone thought this meant Kunye's Qinggong must be lacking, they'd be dreadfully wrong. They fought from the flat ground all the way to the cliff's edge. Then they went on clashing fiercely even while they hung from the cliff wall. Rubble sprayed everywhere as True Qi ran unbridled, the sight impossible to follow. Compared to Kunye's domineering attacks, Shen Qiao's moves almost looked too gentle. His sword took after the man himself, mellow and lingering like a brush of a flower against the cheek or a caress of the spring wind on a willow. Unfailingly clear and pure, much like Taoism itself. But its very clarity seemed to lack that forceful, threatening edge. But after they'd exchanged over 100 blows and Shen Qiao showed no sign of flagging, everyone who'd been worried about him realized that things weren't as they seemed. If Kunye's saber was an unstoppable, rolling thunderstorm, then Shen Qiao's sword, although it seemed no more than an unremarkable, gurgling trickle crushed beneath the saber qi, was an endless, uninterrupted flow that slowly transformed from calm and peaceful into something of awesome grandeur. It was like the 100 rivers that merged into the sea as it roared and galloped, capable of swallowing all. The longer Kunye fought, the more shocked he became. Back on Banbu Peak, he'd only been able to create 8 blasts of saber qi. Today, he could summon 9. His mastery of the saber had leapt to even greater heights. He'd arrived here confident that he could match Shen Qiao even as he'd been before his injuries, and that he was certainly a match for today's Shen Qiao, who'd suffered great losses to his martial arts. He thought the man before him was no more than a shallow puddle, its depths discernible in a single glance. But when he reached his hand beneath the surface, he found that no matter what he did, its bottom remained out of reach. This shallow puddle was in fact a deep pool. Xuandu Mountain's set of Qinggong skills, a rainbow stretches across the heavens, was true to its name. It arced like a rainbow soaring through blue skies, carefree and insubstantial. Shanhe Tongbei cut mark after mark of white sword qi into the steep cliff walls, creating the appearance of calligraphy. But on closer examination, the sword qi had carved deep, vicious gashes in the solid rock face. If such gouges were cut into a person, their bones would show through their rent flesh, and their blood would pour into rivers. From afar, the weapons flashed and danced, their glinting contours overlapping. Yet the savage saber qi seemed totally unable to gain the upper hand. Yue Kunchi breathed a sigh of relief. He turned to Zhao Chiying. "Shimei, I feel like Taoist Master Shen should be able to win this time, right?" Zhao Chiying shook her head. "It won't be that easy. Did you notice? Kunye can create 9 bursts of chi with his saber now. That is equivalent with the highest level of sword intent, and his last burst is the most powerful of all. A slash of his saber gives birth to thousands of massively destructive afterimages. But he's only done this once, and that was the one attack Taoist Master Shun nearly failed to block. Involuntarily, Yue Kunshi gasped, his heart in his throat once again. Is he trying to exhaust Taoist Master Shun's true qi? He is, said Zhao Chiying. When it comes to true qi, Taoist Master Shun is no match for Kunye now. The longer the fight goes on, the worse it'll be for him. Yue Kunshi began to panic a little. Then what should we do? Doesn't Taoist Master Shun realize what's going on? Is he just going to let Kunye get away with it? Zhao Chuyi didn't answer. Naturally, she didn't believe that Shun Qiao hadn't seen through this tactic, but she also couldn't tell what he had planned. In truth, Shun Qiao was also probing. He was probing his own limits. The Zhuyang strategy was capable of rebuilding his foundations, of forging his muscles and bones. And since the Zhuyang strategy combined the strengths of the 3 schools of thought, Taoism extolled that the greatest virtue was to be like water. To strive was to not strive. This was in perfect harmony with his original style of swordplay. They came from the same source, so he had no problem executing it. Buddhism praised solemnity and reverence. There was the terrifying glare of the Vajrapani, but also the gentle submissiveness of the Bodhisattvas. It was something unspeakably profound. The Zhuyang strategy integrated this concept into its true qi, hard to Taoism's soft, a perfect coupling of strength and gentleness. The two coexisted in harmony, embedding a core of iron into his flexible sword strikes, letting them switch freely between a murmuring stream and a turbulent ocean tide. Confucianism was a bit more miscellaneous in its contents. When Tao Hongjing had penned the Zhuyang strategy, he'd taken from Confucianism its kindly tolerance and used that to adjust and combine the strengths of all the schools. When a practitioner exhausted his true qi, their dantian would continuously refine more. It was like a barren tree blooming anew in spring, returning the dead to life. Before, Shun Qiao had Xuandu Mountain's true qi as his foundation. When he first cultivated the Zhuyang strategy, he'd made surprisingly little progress. Only now, as he recultivated everything from scratch, did he realize what was wondrous about the Zhuyang strategy. Indeed, it deserved to be named the world's most extraordinary book. The many people who fought over it likely didn't even grasp what was truly profound about it. Even more incredibly, Tao Hongjing must have known when he penned the Zhuyang strategy that it would be impossible to preserve a book during such tumultuous times. He must have foreseen that its contents might not remain intact after he passed away. And so, although the Zhuyang strategy was composed of 5 volumes, each volume was independent from the rest. Readers wouldn't get a sense of disconnect by reading each individually. If someone could cultivate with all of them, then of course they'd achieve complete perfection. But if they only had 1 or 2, that wouldn't render their martial arts incomplete. At worst, it only lessened the effect. And so, in this battle, Shun Qiao was also using Kunye to test the result of many days of cultivation. Day-to-day sparring could never bring out the full extent of his abilities. Only by facing a true life-or-death crisis could he plumb the actual depths of his potential, allowing him to ascend to an entirely new echelon. The martial path was like rowing a boat upstream. If you didn't advance, you didn't decline. Otherwise, the likes of Qi Fengge and Hulugu wouldn't have risked their lofty status and decades of martial achievement in favor of progressing along a path that could mean their very death. At the moment, Shun Qiao's situation was precarious. His sword qi was getting almost completely crushed by Kunye's saber qi, and little true qi remained in his dantian. Nearly depleted, his attacks were much slower than before, and the power of his sword qi was gradually waning. It seemed he might lose at any moment. Kunye slashed at him, and a terrifying burst of true qi exploded outward. His saber intent transformed into an all-encompassing net that surrounded and enveloped Shun Qiao. Its energy arced in at him, strong enough to incinerate the brush to ashes and transform rivers to vapor. 100 birds were snuffed out in an instant. This was the ninth blast of saber chi that Kunye took so much pride in. Hemmed in on all sides, it seemed there was no way out but to take that ferocious saber chi head on. Kunye was indeed a worthy disciple of Hulugu. Nearly nobody in all the land could withstand such a slash from him. With his body suspended in midair, he channeled all his true chi into his blade and then swung it down on Shunchao's head, his spirit so magnificent it seemed he might slice the sun and moon in two. Shiwu's eyes were wide, staring unswervingly across the chasm at the two on the other side. He forgot to breathe. He wanted Shunchao to win more than anyone else, but even he, a pure novice in martial arts, could see how dire the situation was. Above Shunchao were the boundless heavens. Beneath him was a bottomless abyss. In all of heaven and earth, the only place he could stand on was this precipitous cliff, dozens of meters tall. At this moment, he hung by a thread, and there was no time to escape with his Qinggong. What in the world could he do to block his opponent's all-out strike? Zhao Chiying's brows pinched, and she couldn't help but reach over to cover Shiwu's eyes. She didn't want him to see his Shifu's blood splatter. Shiwu had just lost one Shifu, one dear person. He wouldn't be able to withstand losing another. She was overcome with regret. She should have been the one to fight in the first place. If she'd known this would happen, she would never have agreed to Shunchao's request. Because he'd been so calm and composed, she thought that he had some secret weapon to use against Kunye. She never expected Shunchao to actually fight for his life, to end up in such a perilous spot. The saber chi was as swift as lightning. In an instant, it had reached the tips of his brows, but Shunchao's breathing slowed and he closed his eyes. He didn't choose to flee. He raised his sword to meet it. To know the world, one must first know themselves. Then they must forget themselves. Once they forget both the world and themselves, never again would they be moved by worldly gains and losses. Shanhe Tongbei transformed into a brilliant ray of light, a sword glare. Wrapped within it, Shunchao's silhouette disappeared. The confident smile curving Kunye's lips suddenly froze. His saber chi couldn't advance even half an inch further. Shunchao's sword speared through Kunye's saber chi and pierced straight at his chest. No! Abruptly, Kunye turned, swinging his Liu Shang saber with him horizontally. Sure enough, Shunchao appeared behind him, and his sword intent transformed into two intersecting rays that managed to crush his saber chi entirely. Impossible! The refutation flashed through Kunye's mind, but he didn't have time to think any more. Using his momentum, he leapt dozens of feet into the air, then turned and struck at the rocky wall behind him. The mountain stone immediately gave way, and with a thunderous roar, rubble of all sizes crashed down. With another leap, he landed atop of the cliff. He swept his gaze downward, but he couldn't find a trace of his opponent among all the falling boulders and debris. But just then, an alarm sounded in his mind. Kunye sent another slash behind him, but his strike didn't connect with his enemy. Instead, an excruciating pain burst into his back. Shunchao had been even faster, and it was clear he'd anticipated Kunye's every move. This was impossible. Impossible! He thought Shunchao had achieved the echelon of sword intent, but this was clearly not sword intent. To know others was to know oneself. When one understood the mind of others, one would understand their own. Where the sword was, the Tao was. It was a spiritual link, drawing together the immortal's body and the Buddha's heart. Sword heart. This was unmistakably sword heart. Shunchao had actually managed to attain it. At this realization, Kunye fled forward like a madman. The prickling pain followed him like his shadow. It never stopped, as if securely tied to him by a string, and he was the puppet on the other end, unable to escape its control. It was a horrific sensation. Kunye had never been so terrified, not even when Yan Wushi had been chasing him. Yan Wushi hadn't wanted to kill him. He'd only done it to probe Kunye's martial arts. Kunye had understood that, so he'd never used his full strength. But this time was different. He'd tried to kill Shen Qiao. Of course, Shen Qiao could kill him too. There was no luck to be had when both parties gave the fight their all. Given some time, this Shen Qiao would surely become a terrifying enemy. But the future was too distant to Kunye. Right now, he needed to escape. Unable to help himself, he cried, "I've lost! I admit defeat! Don't kill me!" The prickling pain remained, but its intensity plummeted. Kunye didn't dare let down his guard. He babbled again. "I have to tell you something. It's to do with Yan Wushi. He scorned and humiliated you, but his death is near at hand. Don't you want to kill him yourself?" A sword glare swept past his hair and slammed hard across the trunk of the tree in front of him, splitting it in two in an instant. Kunye could feel the wave of pain prickle along his ear and cheek. It was definitely from the sword glare. But if he hadn't spoken up, the tree wouldn't have been the only thing split in two. His strength spent, he stopped, turning to slump against the stone wall behind him. He didn't even bother to wipe the blood from his blade, but simply thrust his saber into the ground, panting like mad. He could almost hear his heart thundering away in his chest. "I've lost. You've won." He never would have guessed that Shen Qiao could attain the echelon of sword heart. For now, all he could think about was how narrowly he'd escaped death. Lingering fear still gnawed at his heart. He also knew that the moment he surrendered to Shen Qiao, someone who faithfully adhered to the martial code of honor, his opponent would give up his ruthless pursuit. Such a man would never strike him while he was down. Qi Fengge or Hulugu would have done the same. "Have you ever thought of the coiled dragon assembly?" Shen Qiao didn't reply. It was obvious he was waiting for Kunye to continue. Kunye gasped down another breath. "The royal capital of Tuyuhun, Fuqi, will hold a grand gathering on the 9th of September. That is the Coiled Dragon Assembly. Every year, merchants from all across the land gather there, and there are always rare treasures revealed and auctioned off to the highest bidder. I heard that one of this year's items belonged to Yan Wushi's late mother." Shen Qiao frowned slightly. Sensing Shen Qiao's confusion, Kunye sneered. "My Shishong told me that Yan Wushi's original family name was Xie. Rumor has it, he's from Chun Commandery's Xie clan." The Xie family rose to power during the Wei and Jin dynasties. Back then, they and the Wang family were the most powerful and influential clans in all the land, and the most famous person among them was Xie An. Still, with time came change, and the Xie clan's glory slowly waned. Today, the Xie clan was in the midst of a gradual decline, but, as the saying went, a starving camel was larger than a horse. They still had a fair amount of renown in the southeastern regions, and this type of reputation was completely unrelated to the Jianghu. It was built atop the scholar class and imperial courts. But Shen Qiao had made an even deeper connection. "This matter must be top secret. Your people spend most of your time on the grasslands beyond the Great Wall, totally uninvolved in the Central Plains. How did you come by this information, unless someone else told you?" "That's right," said Kunye. "Yan Wushi has made a great many enemies, and none of them will be satisfied until he's dead. On the 9th of September, many outstanding talents will gather in Fuqi. 5 of the world's most powerful experts will fall upon Yan Wushi and kill him. He might be a peerless martial artist, but he can't save himself this time, not even if he grows wings. Yan Wushi had you dancing in the palm of his hand, so I trust that you'd be happy to head to Fuqi and witness his death with your own eyes, no?" All of a sudden, Shen Qiao said, "I finally understand." "Understand what?" "Out of all the nations, Zhou has the best chance of unifying the land. Yu and Yong allied with Chun to invade Qi, crushing them like a stalk of bamboo. Qi's destruction is imminent. Zhou's next target must be either the Khaganate or Chun dynasty. Huan Yue sect is supporting Yu and Yong, so if you want to kill Yu and Yong, you must first kill Yan Wushi. That's why you collaborated with Lin Chuan Academy, all for the purpose of killing Yan Wushi. Lin Academy is highly influential in southern Chun, so of course they could look into Yan Wusher's background for you. At this point, Kunye no longer tried to hide it. You're mostly right, but it wasn't Lin Academy who helped us investigate Yan Wusher's background. It was the Liu He Guild. As I said, Yan Wusher has made a great many enemies. That night in Chu Yuan Temple, he ruined things for Dou Yanshan and destroyed the Zhuyang strategy right in front of everyone. So, of course, Dou Yanshan hates him. Then what about Lin Academy? Asked Shen Xiao. Zhu Yankehui is completely devoted to restoring the Han people's rule. If the opportunity to destroy Yan Wusher and break one of Yuan Yong's limbs arose, he'd never just stand by and watch. He dueled Yan Wusher in Chun months ago so that he could probe Yan Wusher's strength and to prepare for the group assault on the 9th of September. Correct. But Ru Yankehui was injured in that battle, so we can't attend the gathering in Fuqi. Who else will be there, other than Dou Yanshan and Duan Wenyang? Your Shidi, Yu Ai, Fajing sect leader Guang Lingsan, and the former state preceptor of Zhou, Buddhist master Xueting. Every name he spoke was more frightening than the last. But, thinking about it carefully, they weren't unexpected. Yu Ai had already been collaborating with the Gokturks, so when Duan Wenyang invited him along on this, naturally, he'd have been happy to help. The three demonic sects had always been enemies. Once Yan Wusher was dead, Huan Yue's sect would be leaderless. He Huan's sect was suffering from internal feuds, so Fajing's sect would finally win the chance to lift their heads. Of course, Guangling San would involve himself. And as for Buddhist master Xueting, he'd once been Yuan Hu's state preceptor, but when Yuan Yong took the throne, he'd repudiated Buddhism and dismissed Xueting. Buddhism's standing in Zhou took a nosedive. So Buddhist master Xueting would join in the battle as well, either for the sake of his school or to eliminate demons. The idea of 5 killing 1 didn't sound very honorable for grandmaster level martial artists, but if it reaped such incredible benefits, who would refuse? Shen Xiao was silent for a moment. Why are you certain that Yan Wusher will come? He might have already heard rumors of the plan. My Shishong once said that someone like Yan Wusher will still go, even if he knows it's a trap, because he has too much faith in his abilities, because he's far too arrogant. He'll believe that even if he can't win, he can still walk away. Anything too rigid is more likely to break. Isn't this a favorite saying among your people of the Central Plains? Shen Xiao understood everything now. Ruyan Kehui dueled Yan Wusher specifically to draw out the flaw in his martial arts. Guangling San is a demonic practitioner, so he must know how to actually kill Yan Wusher. That's why you're also confident that you'll succeed. That's right, said Kunye. I know you utterly hate Yan Wusher. It'll be such a grand gathering. Surely you'll come to watch the fun, even if you don't participate yourself. However, as he was speaking and smiling, he suddenly swung his Liu Sheng saber, slashing at Shen Xiao. He knew that Shen Xiao would be shaken by his news, and that when he was shaken, his guard would be at its lowest. He was absolutely certain this attack would succeed. Shen Xiao would clearly be a fatal poison to both himself and the Kaghanate. He wouldn't allow him to live. Kunye had already decided to risk this when he'd admitted defeat. He poured a lifetime's worth of power into his swing. If he didn't succeed, then he'd die an honorable death. Chapter 52. Group Ambush. Shen Xiao had attained the echelon of Sword Heart, but it wasn't yet stable. On top of that, he'd just dueled Kunye. His mind and body were exhausted, and he could scarcely continue. Now, as Kunye slashed down at him from above, he only stood in place, his face stark white, as if his mind had ground to a halt. He stared in a daze, unable to react in time. Everyone else was too far away to do anything. They'd only seen that Shen Xiao had clearly been about to kill Kunye, only to stop when he'd loudly begged for mercy. Then the two of them spoke about something, and while Shen Xiao was distracted, Kunye abruptly struck, trying to kill him while he was off guard. Shiwu screamed in alarm. Shitsun, watch out! Kunye's breathing grew ragged and heavy. He could practically hear his own heart pounding. With this strike, he was sure to shatter Shen Qiao's skull and crush his brains, killing him straight away. He didn't think his action shameless or unjust because he wasn't only a martial artist, he was the Gokturk's wise king of the left. Shen Qiao opposed the collusion between Xuandu Mountain and the Khaganate. If Kunye let him fully realize the sword heart, Shen Qiao would become a huge threat hanging over both the Khaganate and Xuandu Mountain. He had to uproot this threat while it was still just a sprout. He absolutely couldn't give it any chance to develop and grow. All of this took only an instant. Saber chi that blotted out both heaven and earth came bearing down. Shen Qiao stayed rooted in place, not moving an inch. Perhaps he couldn't move in time, or perhaps he hadn't returned to his senses, or perhaps he was stunned by Kunye's overwhelming attack. He didn't even raise the sword in his hand. He only took 3 steps back. To everyone else, it looked like a mere 3 steps, but to Kunye, those 3 steps were enough to span a chasm, and so he missed. Finally, Shen Qiao attacked with his sword. The sword glare blazed, a white ray that seemed to pierce the sun itself. It burst through the massive screen for Kunye's saber and thrust right into Kunye's chest. When he'd missed, Kunye had frozen as well, unable to move even half a step. His expression seemed to solidify too as he stared at Shen Qiao, unblinking. Why did... It took all his strength to speak just 2 words. The sword glare vanished. Shen Qiao was only inches in front of Kunye. They were so close. If they breathed, they'd collide. But the point of Shan He Tongbei's blade had already stabbed into Kunye's chest. Shen Qiao's face was paper white. He didn't look much better than Kunye. If his sword wasn't skewered into Kunye's body, it would look like he was the one who'd lost. Because I was on guard against you the entire time, he said coldly. How can I trust someone who poisoned their opponent with joyful reunion to respect the martial code of honor? Shen Qiao then said to him, You've truly disappointed me. My Shitsuan once said that Hulugu was an opponent worthy of his respect, but you, Hulugu's disciple, don't even have a tenth of his character. You're unworthy of being his disciple. Kunye opened his mouth as if trying to retort, but Shen Qiao yanked the sword from his torso, and all that poured from his mouth was fresh blood. Shen Qiao pushed lightly off the ground, sweeping several meters away to dodge the blood that spewed from the wound his sword left in Kunye's chest. Kunye didn't move at all, and his breaths gradually petered out. But his eyes were still wide open, and his body refused to fall. This tragic, moving tableau of one who refused to fall in defeat. It shouldn't happen to someone like him. Shen Qiao walked over, and with his sword gave him a gentle push. Kunye fell straight backward, then finally exhaled his last. Shen Qiao looked at him, his face devoid of joy. This man was the source of Xuandu Mountain's turmoil. Everything had begun with him. Kunye's challenge to battle on Banbu Peak had also raised the curtain on all the misfortunes and setbacks Shen Qiao had suffered. Now Kunye was dead, but things were far from finished. Xuandu Mountain could never return to the peaceful days of its past, and as for the world itself, the flames and smoke of war would inevitably rise once again. Shiwu and the rest all cheered when they saw Kunye fall, but their elation was short-lived. They saw Shen Qiao collapse onto one knee, supporting himself with the sword. He coughed up a large mouthful of blood. At the sight of this, they were terrified. A canyon yawned between the 2 sides. Shiwu wasn't skilled enough at Qinggong to glide across. Just as he was panicking, Zhao Chiying landed next to Shen Qiao. She took his arm, and holding him by the waist, she leapt back across with him. With less distance between them, everyone finally realized that Shen Qiao's face had gone beyond pale. He was only at half his old martial power, and although he'd broken through to the echelon of sword heart at a critical moment, forcibly smashing through his limits with his true chi was too great a burden on his body. Coughing up blood was a natural consequence. But more serious than the blood was that he couldn't stand on his own. More than half his weight was on Zhao Chiying. I apologize for my rudeness, Shen Qiao said, brows furrowed. His voice was nearly inaudible. Taoist Master Shen gave everything you had for Bixia sect, while I, the sect leader, only looked on from the sidelines. I should be the one apologizing. She bent down and pulled Shunchao onto her back, then set off carrying him back to the sect. Yue Kunshi watched in silence. He'd been about to offer to carry Shunchao himself, but his Shurmei took action before he got the chance. The offer remained stuck in his throat. Either swallowing it down or saying it out loud felt wrong. In the end, he just stared at Zhao Chiying's back awkwardly, unsure of what to do. Shiwu trailed after them like a little tail. Even though he couldn't help at all, seeing Shunchao was the only thing that could put his mind at ease. But Shunchao sank into unconsciousness the moment Zhao Chiying brought him inside, and no amount of calling out could wake him. Zhao Chiying told Shiwu that Shunchao had only overtaxed himself and needed time to recover. But Shiwu still stayed by his bedside and refused to leave for even a moment. Shunchao was unconscious for a long time. His dreams were bizarre and varied, flashing past many people and events. When he finally woke up, he sank into a reverie, his expression still somewhat vacant. Shutsun? Shiwu worriedly waved a hand in front of Shunchao's eyes. Shunchao grabbed his hand with a laugh. I'm fine. He'd looked feeble and sickly ever since his foundations had been destroyed, and he'd started practicing with the Juyang strategy anew. Combined with his damaged eyes, no one who saw him walking around outside would believe he was a martial artist who'd achieved the echelon of sword heart. Calling him a bedridden, chronically ill convalescent would be much more believable. As Shiwu had personally brought him back from death's door before, he had a deeper understanding of Shunchao's injuries. Deep down, he was constantly terrified that Shunchao might collapse at any moment. Shunchao must have sensed his mood because he stroked the boy's head and asked, Is Kunya dead? Shiwu nodded. He is. Sect Leader Zhao confirmed it herself. Shunchao released a slow breath of relief. It wasn't yet a year since the duel on Banbu Peak, but so many things had happened during that span. When he looked back, it felt just like yesterday. Shiwu, if someone handed you over to a cruel and evil man, and that led to the destruction of your foundations and Taoist core, would you hate him? Shiwu nodded. I would. Now, that someone is in great danger. If you stand by and watch him die, many innocent people could end up losing their lives or becoming destitute drifters. Would you save him then? Shiwu frowned hard as he thought and thought. It was obvious that this question was a bit too complex and abstract for a boy his age. The most complicated, most tragic thing he'd gone through were the deaths of Zhu Longquan and Chu Yi. A laugh escaped Shunchao. He already knew the answer, so why go and trouble a child over it? Shiwu was perceptive. He raised his head and asked, Shutsun, are you going to save him? Was he the one who almost got you killed? Shunchao nodded. He didn't hide it. Yes. Shiwu was furious. Someone that cruel-hearted doesn't deserve to be saved. Shunchao shook his head. He's not cruel-hearted. He never had a heart in the first place. He treats everyone in the world with the same callousness, and he'll never be particularly gentle toward anyone. But I didn't understand that part. I thought that even the hardest of hearts could be thawed one day. I took him for a friend, and I believed that he should do the same, but that belief was unrequited. If you took him for a friend, shouldn't he take you as his friend too? Shunchao laughed. No. In this world, there are many, many situations where giving someone something doesn't necessarily mean you'll receive anything in return. When you choose to give, you must remember this, or else the only one hurt will be you. Somehow, Shiwu felt like there was a deeper meaning to Shunchao's words and smile, but he could barely understand what Shunchao had told him in the first place, let alone grasp the implications behind the message. That means you're going to go down the mountain to save that man? Shunchao was silent for a long time. Yes, he said. I'll go with you, cried Shiwu without the slightest hesitation. That was the last thing he said to Shunchao while conscious. Zhao Chuyi took a sleeping Shiwu from Shunchao's arms. His sleep acupoint had been pressed. Must you do it? She sighed. Even if you can't bear to part, parting must arrive, said Shunchao. Shiwu is still young, and my journey will be full of dangers. I absolutely cannot let him come with me. He'll understand once he wakes up. I entrust Shiwu to Sect Leader Zhao. Please allow me to apologize once again. He cupped his hands at Zhao Chiying and bowed deeply. Why does Taoist Master Shun insist on doing something so dangerous? Asked Zhao Chiying. When you know the mountain has tigers, why insist on climbing it? Yuan Yong may not be an enlightened ruler. No matter how the world changes, it has nothing to do with us. If you focus on cultivating in Bisha, then with your abilities, breaking through the sword heart and attaining the echelon of sword spirit would be just around the corner. Shen Chao gave a self-depreciating smile. There are certain things in this world that a person must do, even if they know it's impossible. Perhaps the results won't be as you wish, but I won't give up as long as a strand of hope remains. Perhaps I'm just foolish and naive. Zhao Chiying was silent for a while, then heaved a long sigh. You're not foolish and naive. You know all the dangers and consequences, yet you go on, unflinching in your pursuit of righteousness. You hold righteousness above all else. I cannot compare with you. I'm not as incredible as you think. Shen Chao shook his head. I only want to see that man one more time, to see the disappointment on his face. Let him know that the demonic core didn't take, that it didn't control me, that I'm still myself. Done speaking, he cupped his hands at her, then turned and left the mountain, never looking back. During his time at Bisha sect, Shen Chao had removed his common robes and changed back into the Taoist robe he used to wear every day a long time ago. His hair was held in place by a jade pin. His white Taoist robe danced in the wind. From afar, he looked like an immortal or a god. It was hard to look away. Zhao Chiying silently sent him on his way, and 2 verses sprang into her heart. For the idols I pursue within my heart, I'd not regret 1,000 deaths to die. All right, everyone, that officially concludes the reading of Thousand Autumns Volume 2, also known as Qianqiu by Meng Xi Shi. And boy, all I can say is wow to how Chapter 51 was written, which was, of course, the fight between Shen Chao and Kun Ye. Meng Xi Shi just wrote that so beautifully and so profound. It felt like I was reading poetry. And in some ways, like I felt like I got a sense of understanding of all the poetic speech and explaining Taoism and applying it to fighting and everything, or martial arts. And then on the other hand, I felt like, man, I think I need to read this again and maybe even meditate on it to like truly get it. But either way, I just think this was written so beautifully. All of it has been written beautifully, but I particularly love the way Meng Xi Shi approaches fight scenes. She makes them seem so exquisitely beautiful. So we've officially finished this book, and we're moving on to the third one tomorrow, you guys. I'm so excited. I'll see you all next time.